Today, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. So, it's been a long time since I've done a review of a book, and I wanted to make up for that by doing today's video. Today, we are doing a 3-in-1. I'm going to review 3 books for you guys, and we're going to do this in a spoiler-free way, so no spoilers are going to come about here. The middle grade book that I'm going to give you a spoiler review of today is a book that was suggested to me by a subscriber, so I'm very happy about that, and if you have a book you'd like to suggest to me, please let me know in the comment section below. But that book is Emily Rodda's The Forest of Silence. This is the first book in the Del Toro Quest series, and I enjoyed this book and I plan on reading the second book in 2021 because I've got a really hefty TBR up until then, believe you me. I recently did a book haul video and I need to stop buying books. But let me see what I can tell you about this book. It's 120 pages long, which makes it a novelette, so there's not a lot I can say to keep it spoiler free. But what I will say is that this book revolves around a belt called the Belt of Del Toro, and this belt means a lot to this world, to the Del Torans of the Del Toro world. One day, the strap of the belt is found, but there are gemstones that belong on the belt, and those gemstones are missing. So I'm assuming that the rest of the series is going to revolve around locating these gemstones and, yeah, putting them back onto the belt. So I'm going to give you a con for this book. So I'm going to give you a few cons and a few pros for each of the books to help you determine whether this is the right book for you. And one of the cons about this book is being a 120-page book. I was a little bit disappointed to see an implied part 1 and part 2, where in part 1, the first 60 pages, we are following 2 characters. I want to say we're following 2 perspectives, but Emily Rodda is very much an omniscient narrator, so I can't say it's a multi-perspective book. It's just that we are following 2 characters and we do get to see what's going on inside them, internally as well as externally. But in the second part of this book, the second 60 pages from 61 to 120, we are following 2 completely different characters who have nothing to do with these 2, that we've never met before, and we kind of have to start all over again with learning about these new characters and getting invested in these characters when we've just got invested in these 2, and that's something that's always really annoyed me. But yeah, if that's something that you don't think will appeal to you, then maybe this book isn't the book for you. Also, plot conveniences are plenty in this book, absolutely. So there are many times when our characters need to go and do things, and those things are made very easy thanks to plot conveniences. If this is not something that you appreciate, then I would recommend against middle grade, because middle grade is pretty much filled with plot conveniences. And so, because it's the standard, it also appears in this book as well. But one of the pros that I will give you for this book is the characters themselves, whether it be the characters from part 1 or the characters from part 2, they are very intriguing. And while with some adult books we have to deal with exposition, in other words, we have a narrator pulling us out of the story to tell us more about the character, rather than allowing us to see the characters for ourselves through the actions that they take and the things that they do. With this book, we don't have that. We have the show rather than the tell. We get to see who the characters are by following them as they're going throughout their day-to-day lives, doing what it is that they need to do. And the characters are really wonderful characters. I really enjoyed all of the characters that we got to witness, so that's a big plus for this book. Also, a massive plus for this book is that this book deals with my least favorite trope, and yet I loved this book. So that if you can take my least favorite trope and turn it into something that I love, then you've got a heck of a book on your hands, and you've written a really good book in my eyes. So my least favorite trope is the traveling/questing trope, and I discovered this after reading The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring, both by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm just not a Tolkien fan, it's just not me, and a big part of that is because the way that he writes his travelling/questing trope really bored me half to tears, because there's not a lot that goes on while our characters in those books are travelling. Not so with this book, because Emily Rodda is limited by the amount of pages, 120, and because of the fact that it's a middle grade book and so you need to keep the attention of the 7 to 12-year-olds that read this book, book, we are filled with a ton of action. And when the questing trope begins, it begins at a certain point in the book. When it begins up until the moment that the book ends, because we're still on a quest by the time the book ends, we haven't had any lulls at all. In fact, by the time any sort of action starts to settle down slightly, it's only right when we're at the end of the book and Emily Rodda has to tie the book off in a way so that we can prepare for book number 2. So she's taken a trope that I absolutely despise and written it really, really well. If any of this interests you, then I highly recommend picking up The Forest of Silence, Book 1 in the Del Toro Quest series by Emily Rodda. The book that I'm going to give you a spoiler-free review of for YA is Vampire Kisses by Ellen Schreiber. So this is the first book in the Vampire Kisses series, and the short premise that I can give you of this book, because this book, just like with The Forest of Silence, this book is rather short as well. It is 196 pages long, which also makes it a novelette. But there are no plot conveniences in this book, unlike The Forest of Silence. The premise of this book is that it revolves around a girl whose name is Raven, who, within chapter 1, she's a high schooler, she's in a class, and the teacher asks everyone in that class what they want to be when they grow up, and most of the students in that class say the usual things. I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, so on and so forth. When we get to Raven, Raven shocks everyone, her classmates and her teacher, by saying she wants to be a vampire. And we also find out through internal monologues that she has that she wants to experience the vampire kiss, because that is how you become a vampire. Because our main character is very gothic in her way, this book is written with a very extremely gothic tone. If that is something that you don't like, then I would not recommend this book, because it is a very gothic book. In saying that, we again need to keep in mind the age rating. It is YA, so it's gothic in the way of teenage gothic, as opposed to gothic in the terms of adult gothic, where you have your Edgar Allan Poe, for example, which is much darker, or your Joe Abercrombie. Anything grimdark is much more adult compared to this. I would recommend this book to anyone who likes Twilight, because I feel there are certain similarities to Twilight in this book. So the very next day, there's a family that moves into the gothic mansion next door, and our protagonist Raven gets to know some of the members of this family and is trying to work out if they are vampires, because they certainly seem to have all the physical traits and characteristics that vampires usually do. Again, I found this book to be really amazing. I rated it really high. I think I gave it 5 stars, and it's the first book that I read this month, so I started off the month incredibly well. And I just thought it was really well done. I had a lot of fun with this book. This book came from my pre-April TBR books that I had collected prior to April, prior to COVID, and that I hadn't really given a chance to. And I'm so glad I gave this book a chance, because it was so good. I have books 2 and 3 already, because I bought the first 3 prior to April. And I'm glad that I do, because I want to continue reading this series. This book, The Shadow of the Wind, by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This author is amazing. I love this author, and I went into this book really, really anxious, because this is an adult historical fiction, and historical fiction is a genre that I had no experience with prior to 2020, but now that I've read this book, this is my 3rd. So I've now read 3 historical fiction books. The first 2 books that I read that were historical fiction, I did not enjoy at all, and I pretty much wanted to fob off the genre. But this is a book that was selected to be read for the Murphy Napier Buddy Read Book Club of Book of the Month, and so I went into this book a little anxious, but wanting to read it because I wanted to read what everyone else was reading in the book club. And I'm glad I did. So the premise of this book is that it follows a boy whose name is Daniel, who in chapter 1 is taken by his father to a bookstore called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is also the name of the series. This book is being turned into a series as we speak. This bookstore is a safe haven for older books to help them to survive, because for reasons that I can't go into, because it would be a spoiler, the majority of older books are being destroyed. So while they are there, Daniel gets to pick out a book, and he chooses a book called The Shadow of the Wind. He reads it cover to cover. He really enjoys it, so much so that he wants to learn more about the book, and he goes on to learn that that is the last surviving copy of that book because all the others have been destroyed. This then intrigues him and entices him enough to want to research a lot about the author, and we go on this amazing metaphorical journey. There is no quest. He doesn't venture out far away from home, but he ends up doing a ton of research on this author and learning a lot of things, and it's a really fun journey. So it's a lot more fun than I'm making it sound. When I read the premise, I thought it would be something that was very different to what it ended up being, but trust me when I say this book is really exciting. One of the biggest pros I can give you for this book is the writing style itself. It comes across as rather lyrical and rather flowery, but it's not. It really amazes me that the way that Carlos Ruiz Zafón writes this book, because it feels so beautiful, so classical in the way that it's written, and yet the writing style is very simplistic. I feel that anyone who's 18 years and above can easily read this book, whether you're an experienced reader or not. I mean, it's a long book. It's over 500 pages long, so keep that in mind. But the writing style is really easy to read, but it tricks you into thinking that it's a classical book because of just how beautiful Carlos Ruiz Zafón has made this simplistic writing style. I want to learn from this guy. I want to learn things from so many authors, but one thing I want to learn from Carlos Ruiz Zafón is how he's able to take a simplistic writing style and make it sound like it's a classical writing style. He just did it really, really well. So one of the cons, I've already said it, is the fact that this book is more than 500 pages long. So if you're looking to dip your toe into the adult world of books, if you're happy to commit yourself to a 500 page plus tome book, because 500 pages plus in a book makes that book a tome, then by all means go ahead and read this book. Or even if you're happy to start this book and end it whenever you do, say you read a couple of pages a night and that's it, and it takes you all year or whatever it is to read the book, that's fine too. But if something like this scares you and it's your first time jumping into adult and it's because of the fact that it's such a long book, then I would recommend picking up a shorter book than this one. Also, if the idea of having the protagonist research a fictitious author, as in to us fictitious, to him very real, is not something that interests you, then it probably won't be the book for you. But if any of this sounds intriguing to you, then I highly recommend you read this book, not only for the really amazing plot, but the beautiful, beautiful writing style. I love the writing style of this book so much that I actually found out that Carlos Ruiz Zafón also writes YA books, and I have one of his first YA book in a series that he wrote on a wish list of mine, because I want to see how his YA stuff differs to his adult stuff. But I had a wonderful time reading this book, and yeah, if any of that interests you, then I highly recommend you read it. I'm going to let you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading. Bye guys, bye!